Welcome and hello, everybody. Thank you for being with us today. We're broadcasting live from Park City, Utah, where I am and have been pretty consistently for the last 6 months or so. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Jason, you're in California, Los Angeles. And Paul, where are you?
I'm in the Philadelphia suburbs.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, in Philadelphia suburbs. So thank you for being here. As many of you know and may have participated on the last webinar, this is the second time we're going to have our friends here on, and there's a bunch of updates. And we were just chatting before, and the people who are in the know for what often is arcane science have since voted and have consistently voted with their checkbook since the time that we last spoke. And so that's all good news. A little housekeeping for Zoom. As you know, we can't see or hear you, but we welcome all your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can as the presentation goes along here. Also, as you view this, if there's anybody that comes to mind, orthopedic surgeons, for example, or others that are interested in this sort of thing, you're welcome to be in direct contact with Jason and Paul. Jason probably the best contact for that. And so we're also going to be recording this and posting it on the Family Office Insights YouTube channel. And so if there's any reason for you to review it or share it with others, you're welcome to do so. So with that, Jason, you going to open it up, or Paul, you're going to do it?
I think Paul is going to open up. I think we have a slide deck to share. So let's pass it over to Paul, who has very brief background. And I'll let Paul introduce himself with his credentials and his history and his entrepreneurial spirit and his successes. I met Paul about 20 years ago now, while I was a student of his, and it's always been a dream of mine to help him, support him, and drive some of his science forward. So that's what I'm doing here. And I look forward to this presentation and any questions that come out of it. So Paul, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Art. Thank you, Jason. As Jason said, I've been a professor at the University of Pennsylvania for the majority of my career, but that didn't impede me of being an entrepreneur at the same time. And here, what this first slide shows is that I founded Orthivita, brought in the CEO, and built a company with David Joseph, the CEO. We actually went together on the roadshow for the IPO, and then the company was acquired by Stryker sometime later for more than $300 million, which was one of the highest prices ever for an orthopedic device company. The problem that we address at Zeraterra now is really a severe problem in orthopedic surgery. Infections cannot be treated. There's no solution for it at this time. And so if it occurs in surgery, it is really terrible. Orthopedic surgeons don't have any tolerance for it. They do whatever they can to avoid it. And it has to do with the morbidity, but also high mortality. The 5-year mortality of a patient that goes in for a hip replacement but gets infected is higher than for a number of cancers. And also from an economic point of view, hospitals have to bear the cost of all the supplementary treatment when an infection occurs in surgery. And that's an order of magnitude larger than the cost for just the regular replacement, the regular procedure. So there is a major pressure on the system, on the industry, to try to come up with better solutions. And what we do is not make a better antibiotic, but we make a better means of getting the antibiotic where it needs to be for a sufficient period of time so that you can kill off the bacteria that would be indwelling at the time of surgery. And here you see the particle. 4 microns. On the right-hand side, the panel there shows an almost optimal release of 2 complementary antibiotics at the site where the prosthesis, the implant, is inserted. And so what do we do with this product here? We create flexibility for the surgeon to decide how to operate and how to treat the patient in view of that patient. We create flexibility. What we also do, and that does not exist, is by our ability to deliver, to release 2 complementary antibiotics, we can deal with resistant infections, which are also a scourge at this time in healthcare. Now, the other important point here to consider is that given that we have a material, another drug, our time to market is much shorter. Now, the problem is very variable. It can go 1% of cases are infected when you have a joint, a hip joint that is replaced for the first time. But then look at it when after 10, 15 years, the prosthesis has to be replaced, it jumps up. And even more so for a knee joint replacement, it's 1.5%. When one is 55, 60, but when one is 70, 75, the risk becomes much higher for an infection. In trauma, it varies, depends on the extent of the trauma. And here in spine surgery, it also is very variable, depends on the indication, duration of the surgery, the comorbidities, the other disease states of the patient. So it is a very significant problem also in terms of economic values. The size of the market is probably $5 billion. Now, there are approaches to try to deal with it, but they don't really work well. At this time, surgeons will always inject vancomycin in this country at the time of surgery, but it is even with this injection that you have these infection rates that I mentioned. Now, there are a couple of products out there, both in Europe and the United States, that release a gentamicin or tobramycin or vancomycin, but the problem with the current products is that you have a burst release, a major release at the time of surgery and then trickling out of what's still there, and that's not really effective. And in addition, and that's important because it's not really enough to kill the bacteria that might still be there, it elicits antibiotics resistance. So
hey, Paul, can I interrupt 1 second?
Yeah.
Just, it's one data set, but anecdotally, I was at a conference and there was a football player, NFL player, that was making a presentation about what he's doing for charities and so on and so forth. And I thought of you because he said, I went in for an ACL and I got a staph infection and it put me out of commission, for 6 months instead of me recovering from the ACL in a month.
Mm-hmm.
And it caused me to, I know you're going to get into the statistics, but it being that I met one NFL player last week and he had a staph infection. I mean, this happens pretty often, right?
Well, yeah, that slide, a couple of slides before, gives the overall occurrence frequency of these infections in orthopedics. Yeah, it occurs frequently. Think about joint prosthesis. If I go back a couple of slides, oops, here, that's just in this country, 500,000. So that's 5,000 just here. Here, another 5,000. These numbers only increase because over the year, yeah, so it happens frequently. Yeah, and I'm just talking about joints, but here trauma care, it varies enormously. In his particular case, probably he didn't have any implant inserted, which was a benefit because when you have implants, it gets even more difficult to treat it and I could explain that, but I rather do that on the side at
Yeah,
another
of course,
time.
of course.
Yeah.
Yep, yep. Thanks for that.
Okay, but you're absolutely right. Yeah, and this may be anecdotal, but we all have friends and family who tell us such stories. Yeah, I've run into such people myself. The best friend of my ex-wife, for instance, and she's 65, and yeah, and people then need to be amputated sometimes when you only went in to have your hip replaced. Yeah. Okay, let's go here. Now, short regulatory pathway. What do we mean by this? Well, in the first instance, we need to have the material cleared, that is approved by the FDA. And so the way we do that is with the 510K application file, whereby we demonstrate that the material is similar to what already exists. And so we have that file together, more or less, for 95%. And then in the next step, we go submit a next filing to the FDA, in which we say, well, look here, when we add any of the antibiotics, it doesn't really change the function and the biocompatibility of the material. And that process is the same in the US as well as in the European community. In Europe, though, in order to file the application, one needs to have a production facility, because that's part of the file that one has to submit. And so we don't have that yet. That's a critical piece here now, for which we do part of the fundraising. Yeah. I mentioned this here. We have outstanding data here for our 510K application. And we got there with very little of capital. Typically, one needs 20, 30, $40 million for getting to a 510K submission. And that comes from a very reputable report here, Stanford Research Institute. We got there with about 1 million, let's say, less than 1 million. We have excellent advisors. She's known throughout the country. He worked here in Europe. He worked for a European American company. He worked for 3 years in San Diego at the location of the company there. Good. Here's a timeline with plenty of value-inflected milestones built into it. It's natural, but regardless, they are built into it. And as we are here at the point that we got started with the experimentation for our second filing. But here, that's also what I already pointed out, the production facility. We really need to build it out, get started with production, because we'll need that for clinical studies. Now, I mentioned this very clearly because there's not a connection to our story here further on, and I'll point it out again. So we have a fairly aggressive time schedule, and we'll be able to maintain that schedule, provided that we can raise the capital as we foresee it in our plan. So what's our strategy? Focus on orthopedics with a product that has a short duration to market. We control our core technology, and we develop the manufacturing capabilities. We go with this first product to the market, and we also, in parallel, then develop partnerships in the device field, partnerships for sales, but also partnerships based on our very strong technology that we have. And here are a couple of other products mentioned. And we got started here with the development of a second product over the last couple of months. So we have a strong patent portfolio that we can leverage. And you may have observed in the meantime that we have presence both in the US and in Europe. Now, how does one sell? And so here in this slide, we have the example of how to do it in Europe. Europe is more difficult than the US. So It's no different in the US. But what you do is you go to the leaders, the key opinion leaders, and you work with them so that they understand the properties, that they have their questions, that you formulate the best possible procedures during surgery. And that starts way before you can start selling. And so once the approvals are there, you work with your key opinion leaders in a couple of countries, and they will start using it very carefully. They will not jump up and down to treat all of their patients. That's not the way it goes in orthopedics. And so you get perhaps 10% of cases treated. And if we go to some of the countries that we know very well, the Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium, then you can, in the first year, you can get to perhaps a sales volume of about $1 million, round numbers. And then gradually, with confidence being built on the part of the leaders, they will start using more. So you'll sell more at the existing accounts. Within those countries, you'll increase the accounts, and then gradually you will go to the other countries. So it is a sales effort that is different from a cancer drug. A cancer drug succeeds or falls on the basis of the data of the clinical studies. Not so here in orthopedics. You really have to have that relationship with your orthopedic surgeons. And so from a very tiny market share, you grow very gradually. And these numbers may look like small, but there is a very healthy business even with these numbers. So how can one monetize the investment? Well, we'll pursue that goal. We'll create most value to the shareholders. That speaks for itself, of course. And as I already said, in the device industry, the relationships with partners develops differently. You really have to be in the market. But then one can be acquired. We know all of these companies. I have relationships with Johnson & Johnson as a result of 4 or 5 different interactions. And I know all of these other companies, having worked with plenty of them over the years. One can have an asset sale, or one can partner, or in our case, we can even think about an IPO, provided that we build out a company and that we then have sales revenue for Xerosyn, criterion 1, achieve our development milestones for a second product, and have 1, 2, 3 different partnerships. That's a good basis for going public. So we are flexible. Yeah, we don't have any preconceived notion as to how we want to do it. We'll make sure we optimize the return. Comparables, I can go over comparables. Exactech wasn't even a growth company, an orthopedic device company that was public at the time, was taken private by private equity investor, and the agreed upon ratio for the PE was 42. Then the market reacted to it and drove up the price to 48. Here was not even a growth company. Entellus is not an orthopedic device company. It's an ENT device company, here no center. And so I mention it because Stryker acquired it for a very high TTM EV to sales ratio. Yeah, Stryker is a major player in orthopedics, and they were the acquirer of Orthovita, the company that I founded in the 90s and was acquired in 2010 or so. Here, a third example, Pacira Pharmaceuticals got FDA approval for a surgical product, and let me show that. Its value jumped tenfold in 2-3 years' time once they had approval. Yeah, they get approval. The price is about 10, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, and they're, whoops, more than 10 times more. And 50% of their product was used off-label. The indication that they had pursued, and that was part of the final with the FDA, was not an orthopedic application, but there was such a need for that product in orthopedics that was used off-label in orthopedics. It has dropped down, so there are other reasons for that. Let's not belabor that. Okay, what have we done? Plenty. I mentioned all the studies filing our first dossier with the FDA, the various points by compatibility testing, and then testing in vivo so that we would show our material is at least as good as what exists. And I was elated in a way because the data came out better than I had dared to dream in my dream, so to speak. Our regulatory council has reviewed the file, but recommended to do one extra ISO 10993 experiment, and that's currently ongoing at Toxicon. As soon as we have this, the file is fully written, we'll submit that. That's another month or so before we have those data. In the meantime,
Paul, can I just ask a quick question here? It may be way too early to even comment on this, but being that you've got orthopedic surgeons that understand what you're doing and that they have other products that they use to thwart this problem, has there been any initial pushback from what you're doing compared to what's in the marketplace now?
no.
Or is it just too early to have them comment on that sort of thing?
Well, I personally prefer not. I've done a few things in my career, and I don't want to create too much of a scent in the market. Yeah, so people may follow me. There are the patents that are out there. Yeah, but we have not really published our data in scientific journals till when, well, we have some, but there are the most recent that would be most revealing for the product per se. We have not yet published that, yeah? And so the principles are well described and people can find our publications, but we haven't really said this is the product that we are making. You can, most of the information is on our webpage, and people have to think long and hard, where are these guys going? So the reason, your question also relates to what I said, how to market. Yeah, is there pushback? Well, orthopedic surgeons will not push back. They will ask questions. They have to grow comfortable. And so I would not call it a pushback in the market, but an effort, a dedication that we will have to go through with the users. Orthopedic surgeons are amongst the best trained physicians that you can have. The orthopedic residency programs are the most difficult to get into. Yeah. And the reason for that is they deal with orthopedic surgeons are conservative because they deal with the quality of life. They don't deal with heart disease and close to terminal stages of life or cancer and so forth. They deal with basically two things, geriatrics and trauma, and very little oncology. Yeah? And so they are very conservative because they don't want to do anything wrong to their patient. And so we'll have to have an effort at educating. And so some may be more skeptical than others. Yeah, but that's the nature of things. You have that everywhere, anytime. Yeah, okay.
So on the other hand, I tend to look at things just not to focus on the negatives, but to reveal them, which is why I asked the question that I did, and thank you for answering it that way. So on the other hand, being that some of these orthopedic surgeons has voted with their checkbook, there is a sense of optimism that what you're doing makes a lot of sense. And I'm not trying to oversell what you're doing. I'm just, when people behave a certain way, not just in adopting what you're doing eventually, but voting with their checkbook, then that suggests that this is going to help in their practice and the quality of life and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me even add to that, Arthur. Some of the investors of 3 years ago have added to their investment in this current round. So they've seen the progress. They see that nothing else is happening in the field. Huh?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you for that.
A second product. We started with the development there. We get our patents. We can attract excellent people. We formed a network of key opinion leaders, at this time 10 leaders. The person who leads it, quote unquote, the principal investigator, is the director of the Trauma Center at University of Michigan. Outstanding people of the Mayo Clinic, HSS, also someone who was at Heidelberg University, now runs the largest trauma center in Germany, and so forth. Technology partnership discussions on the way. I want to mention here a very interesting one, a producer of cephalosporins. That's the antibiotics of choice in Europe. And us have already had a first conversation about the data. So we got on the way with exchanging the information. Upscaling production, we've already done that in a significant first phase. And then let's get to these 2 points here. Space and a grant. Here in this slide, I mentioned that again. So we are in a round where we intend to raise $1 million, and we have 700,000 raised so far. In part, and here on the top, we say much more. But why is that? We have a grant that will support our Belgian operations. The money that we get, it's non-dilutive money. The money that we get from the government is about $1.3 million, but we need to match that with about 500,000. So that's a first important point here to know. That was the lead in to this point here was in the previous slide, but before I move on to the next bullet, let me mention that any investment of $1 adds more than $1 of value to the company. It adds the value of the dollar plus the grant that is being activated. So $1 adds $3.33 of value to the company. Now, in addition to the grant here, we have identified a facility that is key ready as a medical production facility. That represents a major gain of time on operations. We don't have to modify the facility, and also we don't have to incur a number of personnel costs and modification costs and so forth in the process. The only thing we have to do is put around specific equipment in place and write the protocols for our particular procedure to manufacture. So I mentioned this here, we've raised already quite a bit of the round. The company has already raised a total of $1 million. 4 orthopedic surgeons invest, medical analysis. More than 60% of our capital comes from orthopedic surgeons. The founders are investors, mention that here. Now, we raise a debt round And we propose that this round is converted at the time of the Series A investment at the value of the Series A, but with a 20% warrant, because one comes in earlier, of course, and therefore there is compensation due for that. Good use of proceeds, nothing exceptional, all the normal things here. GMP production is part of it. Management team, Jason Rifkin, who is my right hand. He's got his degrees at the University of Pennsylvania, but he has had a successful career in the device biotech industry, having been chief executive officer of 2 of these 3 companies here. There is a scientist who has worked with me for 15 years with degrees from Cambridge and an excellent research center in France. The person in charge of production is someone with a PhD in the basic science of our process, but has been in industry and in charge of productions of pharmaceuticals in Belgium, for instance, Novartis, Lonza, and then here there is another person who I list who has a deep understanding of the difference between science and product development and can easily bridge the gap between. So we come to the end here of the talk. Directors, not too many at this time, an accountant and a physician MBA, Dr. Guarino, with a national reputation. We have the exclusive license from the University of Pennsylvania. The rest of the capital is in the hands of the founders, but we have capital from angel investors. Yeah, I indicated that will convert, so therefore there will be dilution here of the founders' equity. So we also got a grant from the state of Pennsylvania Agency for Tech Transfer. And I believe this is more or less my last slide here. This is a summary of the company. We deal with major markets with unmet needs. Anytime we talk with orthopedic surgeons, they think about other uses of our product. So expansion of indications. We have extensive proof of concept data, strong IP. We have a platform technology whereby we can get into relationships with other companies. We can build out a company. We are not a one-story company. So we can have multiple revenue streams. I already mentioned the next bullet. And we are certainly attractive to your European partners. And that shows here by the relationship in Belgium, because we import valuable technology. The European countries can piggyback on substantial US research investment, but by having a subsidiary in the region where one produces, one gets anchored. So there are plenty of good reasons why one likes us. And then multiple exit options, favorable comparables, and people who have done it before, Jason, myself, Vogeleisen, and so forth. I think that was the last slide. Thank you.
So can you,
questions?
Paul, can you jump back to the timeline slide?
Oh, yeah. So that's faster. Oop, yeah, okay.
So probably according to this, the fourth quarter in 2023, if I'm reading it right, is the commencement of commercialization?
Launch that when we start with the key opinion leaders in a limited number of hospitals. Yeah, we are more or less a number of months behind here because we are still raising the capital. And so I would push that back by half a year or so.
Yeah.
Build out, we really have to get started with that. And that's really the key point here that will drive the timeline.
And then after this present round, when will the next round be again, just for review, you think?
Let's say less than a year from now.
And if you had to guess what the size of that might be, just a guess.
There we go for 5 million. Well, we didn't include that slide. Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the goal there to go for 5 million?
That's exactly the goal.
Yeah.
And that would be a priced round, Arthur.
Yeah. And you look, I've seen a bunch of this sort of thing, but I don't know the details of how it pans out. And I know that you are able to operate a company and intend to do so, but is there a chance that someone might look at this that close to approval and say, okay, we're just going to take you out?
I think even possibly before approval, this fits into, there's a number of, there's the usual suspects, right? The larger companies that are in this space. And I think this fills a huge unmet need, especially those not in this space, but in the generics space. So this program is being developed to be used with generic antibiotics. And there's a number of them, which obviously when they're generic, they're off patent, their value is only, it's only so much that the market will allow.
Yeah.
When you combine it and create a new use for an antibiotic that did not have a use before, you're creating a new market. And that's where generics can end up having much more value.
And that brings up the value of the generic by definition being incorporated with your application.
Yeah. The look, the reason why I say one needs to go to the market is that you can never predict when will this happen.
Yeah.
When will there be sufficient interest for an acquisition? But I do recall early on in my career when porous coatings were not used at all on hip prosthesis, that everything was cemented. There was a physician, an orthopedic surgeon at Johns Hopkins, who convinced Homedica, I really want a coating on my prosthesis in which bone can grow in. And no one believed in a quote unquote, but there was a key opinion leader from Johns Hopkins. Homedica was interested, and then within a couple of years, every other company had followed suit.
Yeah.
Zimmer was scrambling at that time. They were losing market share. Yeah. And so here the point is to do your work well and have an open mind. When the suitors come along, talk about what it is and what you will accomplish. And then very quickly that adaptation curve will start to accelerate. Yeah.
Is there a strategy presently thinking about going to the European market first? We had that in mind.
Yeah. But that was the original plan. At this time, we have an open mind, but I really want to have the people at Zeraterra to fundamentally address that question. How shall we develop our timeline? Because selling in Europe is more capital intensive. And do we want to do that? What are our most important tasks to accomplish first? And it's clear we really need to have that production facility. That's absolutely key. If we need to do that because we need to do clinical studies. We also need to have it in order to be able to review it by a notified body in Europe. Yeah. And so in the meantime, then we'll go to our next capitalization phase and we'll see where we stand, and then we'll formulate the goals. Shall we go to, for instance, Holland or Germany or Belgium, one market, in order to build the credibility in the product by using a limited market? We may do that, yeah? But keep in mind, selling in Europe is more capital intensive.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Great. Well, that was super, super helpful. I'm glad to see you guys again. Jason, would you be sure to send me this deck if that's okay? And then we'll make sure that everybody who RSVP gets in direct touch with you. And as I say often, if there's anybody in your community while you're listening to this that also would benefit from knowing about what you learned today, then you're welcome to do that, and we encourage you to do so. So we're going to wrap it up, guys. And then, like I said, the recording's here. Thank you again for doing this, Jason, Paul.
Yep.
And then did you just have a closing statement, Jason?
I think the closing statement would be summarizing the promising opportunity. I think this is at the right time where smart money has already come into this company. The company is finishing up this seed round, this angel round, just allow it to continue and move forward to its price round. I think the strongest validation in terms of this program, outside of Paul, outside of the science, outside of the short timeline, the fact that this is regulated as a device and not a drug, I think are the investors that have already come in. These are primarily orthopedic surgeons who realize the value of this, this concept, the science behind it, and how it's going to ultimately be used. And that, when I look to invest, when I look to work with companies, that's always what I go to first.
Yeah, serious domain knowledge.
Exactly.
Voting with their checkbook. That's great.
Exactly.
Well,
So
thanks,
thank
Jason.
you, Arthur. Much appreciate the opportunity, and Paul, as always, a fantastic presentation.
Yeah, it was really good. Paul, you have something to close up?
Well, just a short word. Thank you for giving the opportunity to present. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And as I say, thank you for all for spending with us the only thing you can't make more of, and that's your time. Till next time. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.